Welcome, friends. This episode of Dark Matters has been in the works for a month, and it began with Laureen Ron, which led me to Denise Denault, then Rachel Garden, and finally to Denise Bowden, all missing women out of New Hampshire. Some are possibly connected and some are not, but I wanted to cover them all. And one of these cases also involves a likely serial killer tied to the Bear Brook murders. This episode will contain some information about that case, but it will not be a deep dive into it. There is more than enough information that it would need an entire separate episode. So thank you all in advance for watching this video, and let's get on to what really matters. New Hampshire, the Granite State, home to over 900,000 residents in the early 1980s, and where 4 women vanished between 1980 and 1981. A woman last seen with her boyfriend, another who never made it to her friend's house, a mother of 2 last seen leaving a nightclub, and a teen who walked out of her apartment and never returned. Today on Dark Matters, New Hampshire's Missing, the cases of Denise Bowden, Rachel Garden, Denise Denault, and Laureen Ron. At 23 years old, Denise Bowden was 5 years past her high school graduation in Goffstown and had since relocated to work at General Cable and Demers Nursing Home in Manchester. There, Denise, her boyfriend Robert T. Evans, and her 6-month-old daughter, Dawn, lived in a home on Hayward Street. Robert, who went by Bob, was 14 years her senior, and the relationship was far from perfect. The couple reportedly struggled financially, and Bob, working as an electrician, was a violent alcoholic. November 26, 1981, Thanksgiving Day. Denise and Bob drive 9 miles to the outskirts of Manchester to Goffstown to spend the holiday with her family. After dinner, they leave. 4 days later, on December 1st, Denise's parents arrive at their daughter's home for a visit. However, after their knocks went unanswered, they realized Denise, Bob, and the baby were gone. The Bowdens thought the couple skipped town to avoid their financial troubles, and Denise was never seen again, not even listed as a missing person until 2016. However, Evans did resurface. Between 1984 and 1986, Bob Evans lived in Los Alamitos and Cypress, California, but he went by the name Curtis Mayo Kimball. He accompanied a 6-month-old infant and a 5-year-old girl named Lisa, claiming he was the father of both, tasked with raising them alone. When asked about Lisa's mother, he claimed she died but gave varying accounts of her death. She was in the crossfire of a robbery, succumbed to cancer, perished in a car crash, died during childbirth. It is unknown what happened to the infant, but Evans abandoned Lisa in a trailer park in 1986, where a married couple took her in until she entered the foster care system and was eventually adopted. Within the year, police issued felony warrants for Evans' arrest under another alias of his, Gordon Curtis Jensen. Authorities arrested him in 1988 in California using another false name, Gerald E. Mockerman. Evans was charged with child abandonment and child molestation in connection with Lisa. To avoid reliving her trauma in court, the molestation charges were dropped, and Evans was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but was paroled in 1990 after only serving 1. For the next 12 years, he fell off law enforcement's radar. Then, in 2001, he re-emerged in Richmond, California, using the name Lawrence William Vanner, or Larry Vanner, when he married Eunsoon Jun, a Korean immigrant and chemist. Within the year, he'd murdered her and pled guilty to the heinous act in 2003, which landed him a 15-year to life sentence. That same year, Lisa, now a well-adjusted adult with a family of her own, found out her abuser was not her biological father. Evans refused to reveal his real name or how Lisa came into his guardianship. So, Detective Peter Headley of the Crimes Against Children Detail at the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office set out to identify Lisa and subsequently find Bob Evans' true name, who died behind bars in 2010. After years of waiting, a DNA database linked Lisa to Denise Bowden's cousin in 2016, and soon Lisa had her birth name, Dawn Bowden, the infant who vanished with her mother and Evans from Manchester, New Hampshire in 1981. Just 14 miles outside of Manchester, Allenstown was the site of a quadruple homicide committed sometime between 1977 and 1985, the approximate time Evans lived in the area. The 4 victims were all female, 1 adult and 3 children, and all have gone nameless since their murder. Acting on a hunch, authorities ran numerous DNA tests and get a match. One of the child victims is Evans' biological daughter. Then, another break in August 2017, when authorities announce Bob Evans' real name, Terrence Peter Rasmussen. The Attorney General announced Rasmussen is almost certainly behind the Bear Brook murders in Allenstown. Authorities believe Denise Bowden met a tragic end and find it possible Rasmussen had even more victims than are currently known. Though Denise and the Allenstown murders are connected through Rasmussen, Denise was not among the unidentified deceased. They searched her former home in Manchester, but she has never been found. Authorities believe Terrence probably killed her somewhere between New Hampshire and California. Dawn, now Lisa, has no memories of her mother and few of her abuser, but she has gone on to make new memories with the family she never knew when she met her grandfather for the first time before Christmas. But answers for her mother are still few and far between. If alive, Denise Bowden would be 60 years old. She was 23 at the time of her disappearance and was 5 foot 4 inches to 5 foot 6 inches and 120 to 140 pounds. She had brown hair and eyes and a noticeable overbite. Terrence Rasmussen had brown hair, blue eyes, and stood between 5 feet 10 inches tall and 6 feet 1 inch tall. He used many different aliases: Robert T. Evans or Bob, Curtis Mayo Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Jerry Mockerman, and Larry Vanner. For more specific time periods and locations he used each alias, I will link an article in the Boston Globe in the description. The 4 victims of the Bear Brook murders are still unidentified. The oldest, a female between 23 to 33 years old, was white with possible Native heritage. It is possible she was with Rasmussen in 1975 to 1976 when he visited his ex-wife in Arizona. She had light brown, curly or wavy hair and was anywhere from 5 foot 2 inches to 5 foot 8 inches tall. 2 of the child victims were maternally related to the older woman. The first was 5 to 11 years old with dark blonde or light brown hair, weighing 65 to 85 pounds and between 4 foot 3 inches and 4 foot 6 inches. The second child was 1 to 3 years old, had blonde to light brown, fine-textured, wavy hair, had a large gap in between her 2 middle teeth, and an overbite. The final victim is the biological daughter of Rasmussen. Between 2 and 4 years old, she was white with possible Native ancestry and had light brown, wavy hair and an overbite. If you have any information on what happened to Denise Bowden, please contact the Manchester Police Department at 603-668-8711. If you have any information on the nameless victims at Allenstown or Rasmussen's involvement in either case, please contact the New Hampshire State Police at 603-223-3856. About a 45-minute drive east of Manchester is the small community of Newton, with a population of just over 3,000 in 1980. 15-year-old Rachel Elizabeth Garden lived there with her family. The eldest of 4 children, Rachel spent much of her free time caring for her horse and babysitting her younger siblings, something she sometimes complained about, like many teens striving for independence. A freshman at Sanborn Regional High School, Rachel's peers knew her to be fun-loving, friendly, and outspoken, a small girl with a rebellious streak. Rachel occasionally skipped her classes in favor of drinking and smoking with friends in the woods near Maple Avenue. Peter Jewett, the owner of Rose Corner Market, remembered Rachel as a frequent customer who always gave a smile and a hello. Saturday, March 22nd, 1980, nighttime. Rachel enters Rose Corner Market just a quarter mile from her home and purchases chewing gum and a pack of cigarettes with a $5 bill. She leaves between 9 and 9:30 p.m. with her change, walking down Main Street, supposedly on her way to spend the night with a friend. At 10 a.m. the next morning, her parents reported her missing after realizing she never arrived at her friend's house. On Monday, Rachel's mother called Sanborn Regional High School to let administration know her daughter wouldn't be at school. She still hadn't been found. But, unfortunately, Rachel's disappearance barely blipped on the town's radar. There were no massive searches underway. Originally, many thought she'd run away, something Rachel discussed around the time she vanished, according to a friend. Others thought Rachel was too naive to leave on her own, especially since she left her beloved horse and belongings behind. Something else that hindered the case. At the time, Newton only had one police officer following the unexpected death of their former police chief. There were no posters or flyers for the missing teen, not even a mention in the 1980 town report of the police department's year. Schoolmates assumed Rachel moved away or dropped out, and only learned of her disappearance months, even years later. The friend Rachel claimed she was spending the night with said she didn't have plans with Rachel that night, telling Seacoast Online she didn't know Rachel was on her way over and she never saw her. Still, some of the community looked for the missing girl. Volunteer firemen and local Boy Scouts searched the woods where she often skipped school, while helicopters flew overhead, hunting woodlands, swamps, and fields. Authorities have chased each and every lead, excavating possible grave sites and reported sightings that sent Rachel's mother to Haverhill, Massachusetts, and Hampton Beach, but to no avail. Years later, 2 witnesses near Rose Market the same night Rachel disappeared came forward with new information. They reportedly saw Rachel speaking with 3 young males sitting in a dark-colored car near the store. Rachel reportedly knew the trio, who all had criminal reputations, one even later convicted of assault and rape. Despite the new information, Rachel's case hasn't had much traction since, so we're left to our theories. In Rachel's case, there are 2 main theories sleuthers generally align with. Theory number 1. Rachel's talk of running away was more than just talk. Some believe it's possible she took off on her own and falsely told her parents she was meeting with a friend to get a head start. Investigators also still consider voluntary disappearance a possibility, even though we don't know why she would have run away. Though Rachel disliked babysitting her siblings, she loved them regardless and treasured her horse. Family isn't convinced she'd leave it all behind. If Rachel did run away, the possibilities of what could have happened to her after are nearly endless. She could be alive and well, living a full and happy life, or she might have met foul play, which is what many others believe happened to the teenager. Theory number 2, foul play. Some believe that Rachel fell into dark circumstances surrounding the night she went missing. While a non-family abduction is possible, there's no evidence to suggest any course of events that night. Many believe the 3 men witnesses saw her talking to outside of Rose Market are connected with the case, especially after one of the men made a shocking admission years later. The man confessed to allegedly killing Rachel, saying he was in a bar at the time in Haverhill, Massachusetts, just a 14-minute drive from Newton. No specifics of this supposed confession were released to the public, but authorities excavated an area off of Route 108 and nearby Country Pond looking for remains, but they came up empty. None of the 3 men have been publicly named. It is unknown if any were involved in her disappearance or if the confession was false. However, authorities believe Rachel Garden is no longer alive. By the time many found out that their friend was missing, they'd graduated from high school, something Rachel would have done in 1983. Despite the lack of evidence, hope is not lost. In 2013, then Newton Police Chief Larry Streeter passed on a new tip to the State Police Cold Case Unit. The specifics of this tip weren't revealed, but he did say, quote, "It's just another small piece of information that may or may not fit in the big picture," end quote. 5 years have passed since that development without a further word. Due to a lack of evidence, this case is listed as a non-family abduction. At the time of her disappearance, Rachel Elizabeth Garden was 15 years old, stood at 5 feet 1 inch tall, and weighed 100 pounds. She was last seen wearing a two-toned blue ski parka, blue jeans, a plaid shirt with silver threads, and brown lace-up shoes. She carried a dark blue tote bag sporting the word "Things" on the side. She had light brown hair, hazel eyes, pierced ears, and had 3 fillings and 4 of her wisdom teeth removed. If alive, she would be 53 years old. If you have any information on the disappearance of Rachel Garden, please contact the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office at 603-679-2225 or the Newton Police Department at 603-382-6774. Denise Denault was born in Montana on June 14, 1954, but found herself living across the country in Manchester, New Hampshire by age 25. The recently divorced mother of 2 lived on Hayward Street with her roommate, Tamara Leby, and her 2 boys, aged 4 and 6, who were the lights of her life. Known as a fun friend, beautiful, and a sweetheart, things seemed to be looking up for Denise until one June evening. Sunday, June 8, 1980, approximately 1:30 a.m. After having a few drinks at the private Merrimack Club in downtown Manchester, Denise departs, saying she's going to a party. After Denise fails to pick up her sons and misses an appointment, her roommate knew something was wrong. The dedicated single mother wouldn't have left without warning and was doing all right after the divorce. She reported her friend missing. In the wake of her disappearance, Denise's 2 sons lived with their grandparents, hoping it would be a temporary stay and that their mom would soon return. Unfortunately, there was no trace of Denise. After authorities found no evidence of foul play, Tamara conducted her own personal investigation, speaking to 2 men who heard Denise say she was on her way to a party that night. But beyond that, neither family nor friends have seen her since, so we're left to our theories. Because there is so little evidence in Denise's case, speculation has been limited, but some cast suspicion on her ex-husband. Theory number 1. Denise's ex-husband was involved in her disappearance. What we know of Paul Denault comes from an article published by the Union Leader 19 years after Denise goes missing. In 1999, Paul was arrested for selling 46 bags of heroin to undercover operatives working for Manchester Police, the Attorney General's Drug Task Force, and the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. He was charged with 3 counts of sale of heroin, but was released on a $50,000 cash bail. I wasn't able to find the outcome of the charges. Some speculate Paul Denault's drug dealing was connected with Denise's disappearance. However, it is unknown why Denise and Paul divorced, or if he even dealt drugs when she went missing. Police never publicly connected her ex to the case. Theory number 2. Rasmussen was also responsible for Denise Denault's disappearance. Following the identification of Rasmussen and his likely involvement in the Allenstown Four, some speculated a possible connection between Rasmussen and Denise Denault's case, based on proximity and time. Bowden and Denault lived on the same street. Bowden vanished about a year and a half after Denault. Armed with shovels and canine units, detectives searched the woods behind apartments in Manchester in connection with Denise Denault's case, but ended the search after only 2 days. It is unknown if they recovered anything connected to either disappearance, but they did announce they found no connection between Denise Denault and Denise Beaudin's cases. Which leads us to theory number 3. That Denise met with some sort of foul play, whether that be connected to trafficking, murder, or an abduction. Which takes us to our 4th and final missing girl, who vanished 6 weeks before Denise Denault in the same city, just blocks away from where Denise was last seen. In 1980, a mother and daughter lived on a 3rd-floor apartment on Merrimack Street in Manchester. At 14 years old, Laureen Ann Ron was blossoming into a bright teenager before her mother, Judith's, eyes. A good student at Parkside Junior High School, Laureen loved dancing, singing, and dreamed of becoming an actress, something that suited her taste for warmer weather akin to the California coast. But for Judith, any visions of the future her daughter might have were cut short. Saturday, April 26, 1980, the first full day of spring break for Laureen and her classmates at Parkside Junior High. Judith figured she and her boyfriend, a professional tennis player, and Laureen would travel to a tennis match out of town. Laureen often came along, but on this day she asked to stay home instead. Judith agreed. When night fell, Laureen, her female friend, and a male friend did what many teenagers do in the absence of parental supervision: acquired alcohol. Taking swigs of wine and drinking from a 6-pack of beer, the trio presumably enjoyed themselves, until Laureen's male friend heard voices in the communal apartment hallway. Thinking Judith was home early, he snuck out of the back door of the apartment, hearing the door lock behind him. However, Judith and her boyfriend didn't arrive home until 1:15 a.m. But even before the mother reached her door, she noticed something strange. The light bulbs on all 3 floors of the apartment building had been unscrewed, blanketing the halls in darkness. The feelings of unease grew upon finding her front door unlocked and seeing her back door wide open. Judith sees Laureen's brand new clothes and sneakers in the living room, along with a pillow and blanket on the couch. Upon looking at her daughter's room, she's relieved to see a sleeping form on the bed, but the relief is short-lived. The silhouette isn't Laureen, but her female friend, asleep on her bed. The friend tells Judith she last saw Laureen asleep on the couch. Laureen was nowhere to be found, and Judith reported her missing. Inside the apartment, Manchester police found no signs of a struggle, and all of Laureen's personal belongings, including her purse, new shoes, and clothes, were still inside. The initial reaction was runaway, but after a while, it didn't seem to fit. No clothes or money were missing from the apartment, leaving detectives to theorize the teenager left willingly, thinking she would be back not long after. They questioned Laureen's female friend, who revealed the trio had been drinking and that Laureen recently began helping the local convenience store restock the beer and wine coolers. Judith knew the store. It was a popular hangout for local teenagers. The friend recalled Laureen gathered a pillow and blanket, intending to sleep on the couch and let her friend take her bed. A neighbor later told Judith he'd also heard voices in the hall that night. They approached the apartment, then fell silent. This happened just after he heard someone descend the apartment's back stairs, possibly the male friend who snuck out. Restless, family and friends searched for Laureen, even contacting the FBI out of Concord. They told Judith because there was no evidence of a kidnapping, they couldn't help. However, the agent directed the mother to 2 ex-agents who become private investigators. 3 or 4 months passed, and neither the PIs nor the police made any headway. Then, an unexpected charge appeared on Judith's October phone bill that same year. The charges came from 3 calls out of California. This was during a time when you could call your phone company, enter a special PIN code, and charge the call to your landline number no matter where you were making the call from. And Judith hadn't made the calls, she had no connections to, and never lived in California. The first 2 calls came from Santa Monica, more specifically from a motel payphone in Santa Monica to a motel in Santa Ana, about 50 miles apart from one another. The third call was to an assistance hotline for teenagers to call if they had questions or concerns about sex. A physician behind the hotline claimed he didn't know anything about the call charged to Judith's phone bill. But these weren't the only strange calls Judith and her family dealt with. In the year following Laureen's disappearance, Judith's landline sometimes rang at 3:45 a.m. The caller on the other end was silent and eventually disconnected every time. These calls occurred around the holidays for several years, but they stopped altogether after Judith moved and her phone number changed. Laureen's aunt Janet Roy told the union leader she also received several calls with the voice of a young girl on the other end asking to speak with Mike. Janet's son went by Michael, and the only person who ever called him Mike was his cousin, Laureen. By the time he came to the phone, the caller disconnected. Then, in 1986, the phone rings at the home of Robert Murray, a childhood friend of Laureen's. Robert's mother picked up the phone to a female voice saying she was Robert's former girlfriend and her name was Lori or Laureen. The identity of the caller contacting Judith, Janet, and Robert Murray is unknown. 1981, Boston, Massachusetts, at a bus terminal. A family member of Laureen's claims to see a girl resembling their missing relative, but nothing came of this unconfirmed sighting. 1985, the male friend drinking with Laureen and her friend the night she went missing commits suicide. He was never a suspect in her case, and the reasons he took his life are unknown. 1988, Anchorage, Alaska. Someone reports a prostitute resembling Laureen's teenage picture. The sighting was unconfirmed, but isn't believed to have been Laureen. April 2005. A detective out of Nevada contacts Judith concerning an unidentified female body found in the state in October of 1980. The woman had been murdered, and authorities thought it possible she could be Laureen, though Judith had her doubts. That lead also hit a dead end, and we've been left with only theories for nearly 4 decades. Laureen's case has had plenty of speculation circulating around it. Many of the rumors stem from comments on articles and in web sleuth forums from people claiming to have connections to Laureen. The identity of the commenters, as far as I could tell, hadn't been confirmed, so it's unknown if their claims are true. But remember, these are presented as rumors, and I have found no publications to indicate that they are anything more than that. Rumors included Laureen and Judith living in the same complex as a sex offender, Laureen obtaining the alcohol from an employee at the convenience store near her house, and that there were 2 male friends with her that evening instead of 1, and that some thought Laureen was recruited by Moonies, the nickname for members of the controversial Unification Church, often referred to as a religious cult. Whatever the circumstances surrounding Laureen's disappearance, many are of the opinion the friends she drank with that night know more than they're revealing. Former investigator Tony Fowler also believes Laureen left the apartment with an acquaintance or was on her way to meet someone. Judith and Laureen's aunt were unsettled when the male friend Laureen drank with that night committed suicide in 1985. They wondered what ate away at him enough that he took his own life, and if it had to do with Laureen going missing. Judith claims authorities told her he left a note before ending his life, saying he couldn't take it anymore. It isn't known what the alleged note refers to. Remember, authorities never announced or considered this person a suspect. Theory number 2. Laureen was abducted or lured away from the safety of her home and trafficked. The first mention of this story emerges in a conversation Judith has with an FBI agent, who warns her that youngsters were being taken in Manchester and sold outside the country. The agent also mentioned the Moonies, saying they were recruiting vulnerable teenagers in the city. The possibility Lorraine was trafficked strengthened upon a deeper look into the calls charged to Judith's phone bill out of California. In 1986, an investigator reported one of the motels the first 2 calls were related to had possible connections to a child pornographer he called Dr. Z. A Google search for Dr. Z only turns up articles concerning Lorraine Rahn's case, and detectives couldn't link this supposed criminal to the 3rd call made to the teen sexual assistance hotline. The physician who ran the hotline initially claimed to have no knowledge of the call, but he changed his tune in 1985 after further investigation. I will be referring to him as the physician for the remainder of the video, as his true name has never been publicly released. At first, the physician told investigators he thought Annie Sprinkle, an adult film star who worked with his wife in the fashion industry, possibly had information on runaways. Investigators looked through Annie's films, searching for any sign of Lorraine, but found none, and no evidence links her to Lorraine still. Then, the physician revealed multiple runaway girls visited his wife at their home. No explanation as to why. The information reportedly uncovered by the investigator was relayed by Judith to the Union Leader, Manchester's newspaper publication. She claims the investigator said one of those runaways who visited the physician's wife was possibly a girl from New Hampshire, that she'd come in with an older woman and later moved on to New York. The investigator claimed the physician allegedly, quote, put young girls up in his home and he was doing child pornography, end quote. He later vanished, according to Judith. Those with Hollywood stars in their sights can often be blinded to the seedy underbelly of the industry. Some have wondered if Lorraine was lured away under the guise of fame and fortune, feeding into her desire to become an actress, when, in reality, she was trafficked, possibly by this supposed Dr. Z or to the physician, or it's possible they were the same person. Many, including Judith, feel strongly that the female voice on the other end of those mysterious calls was Lorraine herself, calling home in a desperate attempt to reach out, but being unable to voice the danger she was in. Others say the calls were a cruel prank. Though it seems unlikely, the 3rd and final theory holds the most hope, that Lorraine is out there somewhere alive. She's voiced the possibility that her daughter was the victim of mistaken identity, that she was taken by a perpetrator who believed she was a girl living down the street from them who was involved in drugs. In spite of her own theories, though, Judith holds on to hope that her daughter is alive. Many have drawn parallels between the location of these 4 cases and the victims themselves. We've already mentioned that there's no connection between Denise Beaudin and Denise Denault's disappearances. There's been no official statement ruling out Lorraine or Rachel as victims of Rasmussen, but authorities did announce that Lorraine lived within miles of Rasmussen at the time Denise Beaudin vanished. Still, this is not enough to concretely tie Rachel or Lorraine to Denise's case. But if we remove Denise Beaudin from the picture, is it possible Denise Denault, Lorraine Rahn, and Rachel Garden's cases are connected? An earlier write-up of Lorraine's Charlie Project page noted that Rachel, though she disappeared outside of Manchester, reportedly resembled Lorraine, a petite brunette around the same age who vanished just a month before her. However, a newer write-up of Lorraine's page makes no mention of Rachel Garden, but instead brings attention to the similarities between Denise Denault and Lorraine. Despite being over a decade her senior, Denise reportedly also resembled Lorraine. Their disappearances occurred within 6 weeks of one another, and Denise was last seen just blocks from where Lorraine lived, though they never knew one another. No link between any of these cases has been officially suggested by law enforcement, and they have only officially ruled out a connection between Denise Denault and Denise Beaudin's cases. Since that is the case, not all 4 cases are linked, but many find the similarities in location, time frame, and the victims' resemblances to one another a cause for concern. Both Denise Denault and Lorraine Rahn's cases remain unsolved, but open, like the wounds of their loved ones waiting for answers to heal them. Though it is unknown how Denise's sons have coped growing up without their mother, there may be some comfort in knowing she reportedly loved them dearly. Judith told the Boston Globe she places her faith in her prayers and the safe return of her daughter. Laureen's Aunt Diane told the union leader the family hasn't given up hope. Laureen's case has also been difficult for law enforcement to let go. Fowler told the union leader that Laureen's case was one he wished he could have solved before his retirement. Denise Denault was 25 years old at the time she disappeared. She was a mother of 2 boys, and she had blonde, brown hair, brown or green eyes, and stood at approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 135 pounds. Her maiden name was Lavoie, and she was last seen wearing a brown print skirt, saying she was going to a party. If alive, she would be 63 years old. Laureen Ron was 14 when she vanished. Standing at 5 feet 4 inches, weighing 90 pounds, she sported a prominent scar on her upper leg from falling on broken glass. She had brown hair, blue eyes, and was last seen in a V-neck sweater, a blue plaid blouse, jeans, brown shoes, and wore a heart-shaped gold ring and silver blue necklace. If alive, she would be 52 years old. If you have any information on the circumstances of either Denise Denault or Laureen Ron's disappearances, please contact the Manchester Police Department at 603-668-8711. If you have any information on any of the cases presented here to you today, the numbers for the corresponding law enforcement agencies to report to can be found in both the video or in the description down below. Special thanks to the Patreon family. The names you see on screen are just some of the people who financially contribute to this channel. Whether they are passionate about cases like Denise Bowden, Rachel Garden, Denise Denault, and Laureen Ron's, or the other dark content on this channel, their support cannot be overstated. If you are interested in supporting the channel, information is in the description, but even if you only continue to support by watching, thank you. Thank you for giving Denise, Rachel, Miss Denault, and Laureen's cases a moment of your time, and my heart goes out to their family and friends. They've gone too long without answers, and we all hope closure can begin soon. No matter what you choose to believe or what you speculate, I ask you only for respect in the comments below, both for the victims and their families. And remember, though these may be dark matters, the darkness always matters. Thank you for watching the video. Exposure to cases such as these are highly important. And thank you all for your continued support and for always receiving these cases openly and respectfully. Stay safe, friends, and have a good night.